Hi, what we're going to talk about today is the classification of life. I want to give you in this video just a really quick general overview of the two largest classifications, how we classify things, and then over the course of this week I will add videos that will talk about each of the kingdoms. So the first thing I want to talk about is the domains. So the domains, the prokaryotic and the eukaryotic domains, are the two largest groups in which we can classify everything that is alive on planet Earth. So prokaryotes, as we've already talked about, are those organisms that have no nucleus. They're very, very simple, unicellular, no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles. And then we're going to talk about the eukaryotes, which are more sophisticated, do have nucleuses, and do have membrane-bound organelles. So everything can be described as being either prokaryotic or eukaryotic, and those are the domains of life. Next, under domains, we're going to have kingdoms, and we can fit the kingdoms. There's going to be two kingdoms under prokaryotes, and that's going to be the archaeans and the eubacteria. And I'll talk about those two first, and then we'll talk about the eukaryotes. So the archaeans are going to be the most ancient kind of life on Earth. So the oldest living organisms on Earth. Obligate anaerobes. What that means is that they're anaerobic. They don't live in oxygen. They don't need oxygen. What they do is they're extremophiles, and they live in all sorts of different environments that nothing else could live in, like in the stomachs of methane-producing animals. They live in hot springs where it's really, really hot. No other organism could survive. They live where it's very, very salty and no other organism could survive. So we call them extremophiles. They do have a rigid cell wall composed of a substance, which I spelt wrong here, called pseudomurine. And I've already said they're extremophiles. The next one is going to be the eubacteria, and that U prefix means the same here with the bacteria as it does over here with the eukaryotes. What that refers to is true or new. So these are the bacteria that live all over the place. They don't live in extreme environments. They live everywhere, on your body, on your table, on your everything. And we call these true bacteria because they're what you're mostly thinking about when you're thinking about bacteria. But they're also prokaryotic. They are unicellular, of course, always unicellular. Here's a picture of the difference, some of the different species, I guess, of some of the archaebacteria and the eubacteria. Some do have a cell wall. It's composed of peptoglycan. The next category, we are going into the eukaryotics, and it's fungi. Oh, I've had a time with these things today. You want to talk about a learning curve. Anyways, fungi. Heterotrophic. What does that mean? That means that they can't make their own food like plants. They have to eat other organisms. They have a wide variety of strategies for eating other organisms, and we're going to be talking about that. So fungi are generally unicellular. There is one exception to that, and that's going to be yeast. But for the most part, when you think about fungi, you're thinking about things like mushrooms, toadstools, molds, and things of that nature, and they're multicellular. They do have cell walls, and it's made of a substance called chitin. And the chitin is the same type of substance that you would find in the exoskeletons of insects. It's a tough carbohydrate. So that's fungi. There's a nice picture of a fungus for you. Okay, so the next one will be animals. Animals, always multicellular. If it's unicellular, we're not going to consider it an animal. Heterotrophic, much like fungi. They cannot make their own food, cannot photosynthesize. So they're heterotrophic. But animal cells have no cell walls, and we have mentioned that before. There's a nice animal for you. That's a mammal, of course, but animals are also going to include, as well as mammals, they're going to include birds and fish and reptiles and amphibians. So all of those would be considered animals. Then we have the plant kingdom, kingdom Plantae. Multicellular, always. It's got to be multicellular, or we don't consider it a plant. They're autotrophs. They can make their own food, and that is a defining characteristic of being a plant. The cell walls are made of cellulose, and we talked about that right from the very beginning. And it really is going to be helpful for you to keep in mind the various cell walls of the different kingdoms, because that's often a question. And there's a nice Creative Commons copyright-free picture of a plant. And the last category is Protista. Now, Protista is mostly unicellular, like 99.9% unicellular, although organisms in Protista can live together in colonies, and algae. Kelp is a really good example of that. So they live together in big colonies. And so Protista is what we call a catch-all category. It's the organisms in Protista may not actually be that closely related to one another. They're going to be closely related to fungi, animals, and plants, in that all four of them would be considered eukaryotic. But we have Protista that are more plant-like because they photosynthesize, like those really beautiful little diatoms we looked at under the microscope. They're like one-celled plants almost, but they're not considered plants because they're one-celled. They can be animal-like, like a paramecium, and have to ingest their food. And they can be fungus-like, like a slime mold or something like that. They act like fungus, however, they don't have chitin in their cell walls, so they're not considered, and they're unicellular. So we're not going to consider them as being fungus. There's a really nice picture of a paramecium. And that's all I wanted to talk about today. So tomorrow, what I'll do is I'll go through one of those categories in great depth. I'm not going to go through the RK bacteria because you guys are going to do a presentation on that one, or a PowerPoint on that one, and do some investigating into the different strategies for how these extremophiles survive. So I will probably start with bacteria and work my way through. And